On the morning of June 6, 1889, a glue pot tipped over in a cabinet shop on the corner of Front and Madison Streets in Seattle, and within 30 hours the entire commercial district of the city was gone. The shop belonged to a Swedish carpenter named John Back, an assistant to a cabinet maker named Victor Claremont, and the heated glue, left unattended on a gasoline stove, ignited a pile of wood shavings. Back attempted to smother the flames with water. Water and burning glue do not mix. The flame leapt, climbed the wall, found the turpentine, and within 10 minutes the building was lost. Within an hour, the block was lost. By midnight, the harbor was visible through the wreckage of 25 city blocks of brick, timber, and ironwork that had stood there since 1855. The peculiar detail, the one that sits quietly in the contemporary newspapers and is rarely repeated since, is that the fire did not spread the way fires spread. Witnesses described it as moving downward as much as outward. Several accounts in the Seattle Post-Intelligencer of June 7th and June 8th noted that the flames appeared to drop into the basements before they took the upper floors, that the cellars went first in many buildings, and that men who tried to fetch goods from below the street level found the way already burning when the storefronts above them were not yet alight. This was attributed to drafts, to wind, to the wooden water pipes the city had laid in 1881, which were said to have ruptured and fed the fire from beneath. There are, in the official record, no fewer than 4 separate explanations for why the fire of 1889 burned downward. None of them agree. If you walk that block today, you will find yourself standing on Pioneer Square. You will find yourself, more precisely, standing on top of it. The sidewalk under your feet is not the sidewalk that existed on June 5, 1889. It is 8 to 35 feet higher. The storefronts you pass are not the storefronts the fire took. Those storefronts are still there, beneath you, with their brick walls intact, their iron lintels in place, their windows still glazed in some rooms, their doors still hinged. The Seattle that burned in 1889 was not demolished. It was sealed. Seattle was not rebuilt. It was buried. This is what they did not put in the official record. In the weeks following the fire, the city's engineers convened at the Frye Opera House, which had survived because it sat at the edge of the burn zone, and they made a decision that has no clear precedent in American municipal history. The recommendation came from Reginald Heber Thompson, a 33-year-old city engineer who would go on to regrade the hills of Seattle into the harbor, and whose name is on the deeds of more vanished topography than any other figure in the Pacific Northwest. Thompson's argument was that the streets of Pioneer Square sat too low. They flooded at high tide. They drained sewage poorly. The fire, he said, had given the city an opportunity to start over at a higher elevation. The streets would be raised. The new streets would be raised 8 feet at the waterfront and as much as 35 feet at the inland blocks. The buildings, however, would not be raised. The buildings, he argued, should rebuild on their original foundations, and the new streets would simply pass over them. The property owners protested. They had insurance. They had urgent capital. They wanted to rebuild now on the ground they owned, at the elevation their foundations sat at. The city told them to proceed, so they did. They rebuilt their buildings on the original foundations through the summer of 1889, and through the autumn and into the winter. And then, in the spring of 1890, the city began the regrade. The new street surfaces rose, on great earthen berms, past the second-floor windows of the buildings the property owners had just finished rebuilding. The first floors of those buildings, with their merchandise still on the shelves, with their counters still polished, with their gas lamps still installed in the rear corridors, became the basements of a city that did not yet know what to do with them. For a few years, the lower sidewalks remained in use. Pedestrians walked at the original ground level along wooden boardwalks, while horse traffic passed overhead on the new graded streets. Ladders connected the 2 levels. Then, between 1893 and 1907, the lower passages were officially closed. The reasons given in the city's public works records were, in order of frequency, bubonic plague concerns following the 1907 outbreak in San Francisco, structural instability of the wooden retaining walls, fire risk from gas leakage, and moral hazard, a euphemism that appears in the minutes of the 1906 Public Health Commission and is never further defined. The lower sidewalks were sealed. The doors at street level were bricked over. The glass prisms set into the upper sidewalks, purple-tinted, square, 3 to 4 inches across, were left in place to admit light to the rooms below, on the theory that the rooms below would still occasionally need to be entered for inspection. The prism glass is still there. You can find it on First Avenue, on Yesler Way, on Cherry Street, and along stretches of Washington Street in South Main. It has turned amethyst from a century of ultraviolet exposure on the manganese and the original glass. The sidewalks above the prism glass are walked over every day by tens of thousands of people who do not know what is beneath them. The glass admits light downward into rooms that, according to the official record of the city of Seattle, are empty. What is left below is more intact than any standing structure in American urban archaeology. Original brick storefronts with their painted signage still partially legible. The lower walls of Pioneer Square's commercial blocks, cast iron column bases stamped with the foundry mark of Hinckley Locomotive Works of Boston, dated 1882, window frames with putty still holding the glass, doors with their original brass hinges. In one passage beneath the corner of First and Yesler, a wooden barber's chair, upholstered in horsehair, was photographed in situ in 1954 and has not been moved since. The photograph is held in the Museum of History and Industry, accession number 1986.5.4271. The chair, according to the most recent surveys, is still where it was. In 1965, a journalist and historian named Bill Speidel, who had been writing humorous columns for the Seattle Times about the city's forgotten history, organized a public tour of a portion of the underground beneath Pioneer Square. He had been campaigning since 1954 for historic preservation of the area, and the tour was, in part, a fundraising effort. 25,000 people came in the first year. The Pioneer Square Historic District was created in 1970, in no small part because of Speidel's pressure. The underground tour, as it came to be called, is still in operation today and has shown roughly 3 million visitors, a curated portion of the lower city. What the tour shows is real. The brick arches at the entrance under Doc Maynard's public house, the cast iron columns, the purple prism glass viewed from below, casting its lavender light onto the dust of 130 years, the crumbled wallpaper, the painted advertisements for tonics and tooth powders. What the tour does not show is the rest. The underground tour follows a fixed route through approximately 3 city blocks. The known underground extends, by surveyors' reckoning, across the entire original commercial district, at minimum 25 blocks with branching service corridors that connect the bricked-over storefronts to former alley accesses, coal chutes, and the lower terminus of the original Yesler's Mill Flume. The tour route covers, generously, 8% of the surveyed underground. The other 92% is referred to in tour staff parlance as the closed sections, and is accessible only with a city permit and a structural escort. In 1907, the same year that the Public Health Commission cited moral hazard as a reason for sealing the lower sidewalks, Mayor William Hickman Moore signed an order, Municipal Order 1907-114, available in the Seattle Municipal Archives, directing the Department of Public Works to wall, brick, or otherwise permanently obstruct 3 specific corridors of the lower commercial district. The order names the 3 corridors by location: the passage beneath Cherry Street between 1st and 2nd Avenues, the passage beneath James Street between 1st and Occidental, and the long corridor beneath the Pioneer Building extending from Yesler Way to the alley behind the Mutual Life Building. The order gives no reason. The order is 2 paragraphs long. The order was carried out within 60 days. Among the items installed in the lower commercial district in the year before the Great Fire were 14 cast iron gas lamps supplied by the Seattle Gas Light Company under contract dated March 14, 1888. The contract is preserved in the Seattle Municipal Archives, File 26-A-104, in a bound folio of utility plats from the 1880s. The plat shows 14 lamp positions, 4 along the original lower Yesler Way, 3 along First Avenue between Yesler and Washington, 2 each on Cherry, James, and Main, and 1 in the rear service corridor of the Pioneer Building. Each lamp was a Welsbach-style mantle on a cast-iron post, supplied by a 1/4-inch gas line from the company's main on Western Avenue. In 1907, the same Department of Public Works that bricked over the corridors was instructed by the Seattle Gas Light Company to cap the gas service to the lower commercial district. The capping was performed at the Western Avenue main. The lamps themselves were not removed. There was no budget line item for removal. There was no archival record of removal. The lamps, in 1907, were left in place with their mantles intact, and their supply lines were sealed at the source. In 1932, a junior engineer in the city's Department of Public Works named Cyril A. Brookhaven was sent into the closed corridor beneath Yesler Way to assess the condition of the brick retaining wall, which had begun to bow inward following an unusually wet winter. Brookhaven was 31 years old, a graduate of the University of Washington, and had been with the department for 4 years. He was accompanied by an assistant, a man named Halverson, whose first name does not appear in the record. Brookhaven's report, dated March 11, 1932, is 2.5 pages long. It is held in the Seattle Municipal Archives, Manuscript Division, Box 47, file labeled Public Works, Internal Memos, Q1 1932, partial. 2 paragraphs of the memo are unredacted. They read, "The retaining wall at Station 4+20 is intact and shows no displacement beyond the previously noted 3/4-inch lean. The mortar joints in the upper course are weathered but sound. I observed no water infiltration along the surveyed segment. The structural concern that prompted this inspection appears, on present evidence, to be without foundation." Proceeding south from Station 4+20 toward the disused lower passage beneath Yesler Way, my lantern was unnecessary. There is, at the base of the prism array directly beneath the curb cut at the southeast corner of First and Yesler, a soft amber flame approximately the height of a thumb, issuing from the mantle of what appears to be one of the original Seattle Gas Light Company lamps. The mantle is intact. The flame is steady. There is no audible hiss of gas. I cannot account for the source of supply, the gas main having been capped at Western Avenue 25 years ago. Halverson observed the flame as well and will so attest. The remainder of the memo is redacted. The redaction is recent. The underlying paper shows the impression of typewriter strikes, but the carbon has been chemically lifted. The file was originally classified as a Public Works internal communication and was unavailable to the public. It was declassified in 1978 under a general housekeeping order that opened all pre-1940 internal communications. It was reclassified, partially in 1994, by a municipal records order whose justification cites ongoing structural concerns and liability exposure. The order is signed, but the signature is not legible. Cyril A. Brookhaven was transferred from the Department of Public Works to the Department of Streets and Sewers on April 2, 1932, 3 weeks after his memo. He was reassigned to a desk position. He filed no further field reports. He resigned in February of 1936, citing personal reasons. He moved to Spokane, took a position with a private engineering firm, and died in 1957 at the age of 56. His personal papers, deposited at Eastern Washington University, contain no reference to the 1932 inspection. They contain, in a notebook dated 1934, a single line in his handwriting: "The light is older than the lamp. If you've made it this far, you've earned the rest." The known surveys of the Seattle Underground identify 5 distinct lower levels. Level 1 is the upper layer of the underground tour. The storefronts that were the original first floors of the post-fire reconstruction, now buried beneath the regraded streets. Level 2 is the original lower sidewalk and service corridor system. Level 3 is a series of cellars and sub-basements that predate the 1889 fire and that were largely undisturbed by it, having been below the burn line. Level 4 is the original drainage and tide flat layer, with timber pilings dating, by dendrochronological analysis, to the 1850s. Level 5, identified in 2 separate surveys, one in 1928 and one in 1971, is described as stone-paved at irregular intervals, predating known European settlement, possible indigenous origin, possible survey error. The 1875 dating of certain elements in the lowest level comes from a single 1928 report by a city geologist named Francis Wendell, who collected charcoal samples from a hearth-like depression in the stone paving and submitted them for analysis. The samples returned a date range of 1860 to 1880, with most likely center point 1875. The report, like Brookhaven's, is partially in the manuscript division. The 1875 date is, on its face, only 14 years before the fire, and 23 years after Henry Yesler's official land claim of 1852, but the paving, Wendell wrote, was of considerably older provenance than the charcoal lying upon it. The hearth is not original to the surface. The surface is original to itself. There are references, uncatalogued, unconfirmed, but consistent, in early ethnographic interviews conducted with Duwamish elders by the anthropologist Erna Gunther in the 1920s and 1930s, to a stone-paved street under the river that the speaker's grandfathers had described. Gunther's notes, archived at the University of Washington's Burke Museum, identify the speakers only by initials. The references are fragmentary. They describe a place that the white men buried, but it was already buried. They describe walking, as children, with elders who pointed at the ground near what is now Pioneer Square and named the place in Lushutseed, a name that Gunther transliterates and that translates approximately as the Lower Town or the Older Town. The official position of the city of Seattle, expressed in every municipal publication on the subject since 1972, is that the underground consists of the post-1889 sealed first floors and nothing more. The 5-level survey is not officially acknowledged. The 1875 charcoal date is not officially acknowledged. The Lushutseed reference is not officially acknowledged. The tour guides, however, talk among themselves. There is, on the staff of the underground tour, a culture of shared anecdote that is not part of the tour script. A guide who has worked the route since 2009, identified here only as MK, told an interviewer in 2021 that there are rooms we don't open. When pressed, MK described a sealed door on the level 2 route behind a fire-rated panel that the company says is structural, but that has, on its interface, marks like someone scratched at it from the other side. Another guide working a different shift described a rule we all know without anyone saying it, which is that the tour stops at level 2. Asked what was at level 3, the second guide said, "I've never been. I've never wanted to go. The supervisors who have been won't talk about it." These accounts are not verifiable. They are not, by any rigorous standard, evidence. They are, however, consistent across decades of underground tour staff turnover, and they consistently identify the same physical features, the marked door, the level 2 limit, and a phenomenon multiple guides describe as the soft sound, like a footstep but slower, from the closed corridor under Cherry Street. The Cherry Street corridor is one of the 3 sealed in 1907. The James Street corridor is the second. The long passage beneath the Pioneer Building is the third. Each of these corridors was bricked over with a double course of fired brick set in lime mortar, the workmanship described in the 1907 Public Works Closure Report as redundant for the stated purpose of pedestrian exclusion. The same report notes that the brickwork was inspected on completion by an engineer named E. Vance Carleton, who countersigned the closure on October 4, 1907. Carleton, like Brookhaven 30 years later, was transferred shortly thereafter to a different department. The pattern is not, on its own, conclusive. The actual archival paperwork on the 3 closures is internally inconsistent. The Cherry Street corridor was closed, per the public order, for sanitation. The internal Public Works memo, dated August 17, 1907, gives a different reason. To obstruct lower-level access to a section of the original 1888 gas supply network whose capping at the Western Avenue main has, on inspection, been found insufficient to interrupt service. The James Street corridor was closed, per the public order, for structural reasons. The internal memo identifies the closure as a precaution against an observed luminance in the lower passage of unknown origin, possibly phosphorescent, possibly residual gas. The Pioneer Building corridor was closed, per the public order, for fire safety. The internal memo, the longest of the 3 at 4 pages, is mostly redacted. The unredacted portion concludes, "The corridor is to be sealed. The seal is not to be opened by any employee of this department or any successor department without the written authorization of the mayor of the city of Seattle. No such authorization has been issued. The corridors remain sealed. The brick is original. The mortar is original. The gas supply plat of 1888 still shows the lamps. The lamps, on the official inventory of city-owned outdoor fixtures, do not exist. Here is what is verifiable. The prism glass embedded in the upper sidewalks of Pioneer Square is original to the post-fire reconstruction and admits light into the lower rooms exactly as it did in 1893. The brick arches visible from the underground tour entrance are original to the 1890 rebuild and have not been substantially altered. The Seattle Gas Light Company plat of 1888, file 26-A-104, lists 14 cast iron gas lamps installed in the lower commercial district, and the file is open to public inspection at the Seattle Municipal Archives. The 1932 Brookhaven memo, partially redacted, is in Box 47 of the Manuscript Division and may be examined by appointment. Mayor Moore's 1907 closure order, naming the 3 corridors, is on the open shelf. Here is what cannot be verified. The lamps are sometimes still alight in the side passages. Soft amber light has been reported through the prism glass at the corner of First Avenue and Yesler Way at hours when there is no sun above the glass, most commonly according to anecdotal reports collected by amateur historians since the 1970s between 3 and 4 in the morning. A 1972 maintenance crew report, referenced in 2 separate public works inventories of that year, describes an inspection of the sealed corridor under James Street and a recommendation that the seal be reinforced and the matter not be revisited. The report is no longer in the file. The inventory entries remain, but the document they index is gone, and no copy has been located. Tour guides, off the record, describe footsteps in level 3. None of this is admissible. All of it is consistent. There are 3 competing theories, each held by people who have read the same documents and walked the same route. The first is that everything anomalous is a survey error or a folkloric overlay on a perfectly mundane piece of urban archaeology. That the lower city is exactly what the city says it is, sealed first floors with a colorful history, and that the gas lamp accounts are misidentifications of phosphorescence, reflected sunlight, or imagination. The second is that the burial in 1889 and 1907 was deliberate, that R.H. Thompson and his successors sealed the lower city, not because the streets needed to be raised, but because something in the lower city needed to be enclosed, and that the gas lamps were left burning, intentionally or otherwise, as part of an arrangement that the city of Seattle has continued to honor without continuing to acknowledge. The third is that beneath the buried Seattle of 1889, there is an older Seattle predating the Yesler land claim of 1852, of which the stone paving in the lowest survey level and the Luschutseed references in Erna Gunther's notes are the surviving traces, and that everything above level 3 is a successive sealing of a place the city has been built on top of for longer than the city has existed. These theories cannot all be true. They can, however, all be argued from the same archive, which is the most uncomfortable feature of the Seattle Underground. The documents do not adjudicate among them. The documents merely accumulate. The lamps the city government says do not exist are still listed in the 1888 Seattle Gas Light Company gas supply plat, in file 2-6-A-104 of the Seattle Municipal Archives. The plat is public record. The lamps are not. The 14 positions are marked in fine ink on a folded paper survey, signed by a draftsman whose name has worn nearly off the corner of the page, and the lines from the Western Avenue main run across the paper in a pattern that, if you look at it for long enough, begins to resemble the route the underground tour takes today, with several extra branches that the tour does not take. If you walk over the prism glass on First Avenue at the corner of Yesler Way at the right hour, you may notice the soft amber tint at your feet. The official explanation is sunlight refraction. The unofficial explanation is something the city stopped printing in 1907,